In this video, I want to show you how you can use release conditions in your Desired to Learn course as a way of controlling content and what students see at different times. So you'll notice that I've actually set it up with a split page here. On this left-hand side, I'm logged in as the teacher who's managing a course, and on the right-hand side, I'm logged in as a student. So notice I have Demo Student up in the top right-hand corner. And this is just so that you can see how making a condition on the teacher account will be reflected in the student account. So to begin adding release conditions, I'm going to view the content in my teacher window. And I want to show you that there's this link here under Unit 1 to add dates and restrictions. And that would be the same for any of the modules or any of the units, that I could add specific restrictions. The same goes for any specific item. So for example, if I wanted to put a restriction on this Dropbox, I don't want the students to be able to see the Dropbox until they have visited this assignment, let's say. Well, let's see what that looks like on the student end. Currently, students can see everything, so they're viewing Unit 1 just as I've shown over here. But let's say in Final Project, I want a specific restriction, and I can do that by going to Edit Properties in Place. And I now have this link to add dates and restrictions. When I do that, I could actually add a specific start date for this, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But in this case, I specifically want to add a release condition that says a student can't see the Dropbox until they have visited this item. So let's go and create a release condition. And in that case, release this item when the following condition is met. I want to go to that a content topic has been visited. So at that point, it's going to then let me search for the content in my course, and I know that I was specifically looking for one down here, Unit 1 D2L ePortfolio Guide Instructors. Okay, so don't forget to click the update button, because most often I've done this myself, it looks like it's been applied and then I start navigating somewhere else and it hasn't actually taken hold. So make sure to click the update button. Once you do that, you're going to see a little icon here that certain conditions must be met in order to see this. So if I go and refresh the student page, you'll notice that now all of a sudden they do not see the Final Project Dropbox because they haven't visited this item. So look at what happens now when we let them go into that item, and D2L acknowledges that they have in fact visited that item. When they go back to the content page, there is the Dropbox. So I've manually put in a control feature that says students can't see certain pieces until they have satisfied certain criteria. That's pretty powerful, I think. Now, what if I wanted to put a control on a whole unit? So that is to say, maybe I don't even want my students to be able to see that Unit 2 exists until they have uploaded something, so until they finally submitted their final project. Well, let's look at what that looks like. In this case, I'm going to use add dates and restrictions, and in this case I want to create a release condition that's based on a Dropbox submission. So once again, I'm going to look in this list at the possible conditions, and there's a whole bunch of different items to look at. But the one I'm interested in here is submission to a Dropbox. And then it's going to show me all of the Dropboxes in my course, and I only have that one, and I create. Don't forget to update. Now if I reload the student side, I want you to notice that they can see Unit 1, but Unit 2 doesn't even exist on their list. They have no ability to access it because D2L is waiting for an assignment to be dropped in here. So let's do that as a test on the student side. If they were going to upload a document, let's go, all those pictures of my face. Okay, so let's take a random document, perhaps from here, and I'm going to drag this in to upload. And the students could then type a message if they needed to, and they could submit to Dropbox. Okay, so now that they've done the submission, if they go back to their content page, they can see that Unit 2 has magically become available because it acknowledges that they have submitted their final product. What's really cool about this is that you can put almost any type of release condition you want. So for example, I could have multiple conditions that say they have to submit to a Dropbox and post on a discussion forum, or submit to a Dropbox and complete a quiz, in which case it's going to look for all of these items to be completed before content is distributed. So there's a lot of different ways of controlling how content goes out with release conditions. If you're not interested in release conditions, you simply want to put a start date and an end date on a unit, you can do that in the same way that when we found release conditions at the top, there is also the ability to put a start date. This is somewhat distinct in that even though you've put a start date, it doesn't mean that the students can't see it at all. It means they'll be able to see that it exists, but not that they can access it. So I'll show you what I mean by that. In this, let's say I wanted Unit 2 to have a specific start date, and let's make the start date tomorrow at 3 p.m. and I'm going to update that. Notice here on it says that it begins October 30th. And actually, let's release this old condition here so that it's just based on date now. Okay, so that's the only thing. And if I reload the student's page, I want you to notice over here that students can in fact see that the unit exists. They can click on the unit, but they can't actually access this resource because it is not available to them. So understand that putting a start date means they still know it's there, they just don't have the ability to access it. If I went back in and took off that start date and clear it away and update it, then when the student reloads their page, they can see Unit 2, and in fact when they click on it, they can open that document as they would normally. So that's the gist of using dates and release conditions. There's one last thing that I wanted to show you, and that comes down to isolating specific groups in your course. So under Edit Course on the teacher page, you'll notice there's an option here for creating specific groups. Here we go. Now this has many uses. If there was a group of students in a course who needed to receive special content, or who you wanted to control what they saw, this could be useful for kids who are enrolled in SHSM, or if they happen to be IB kids that are mixed in with your other group. Or even if you just have a group of students that you know have IEPs, it would be nice to keep them on a separate list so that you can control how content is viewed by them specifically. So in this case, let's do a new category, and we're going to call the category IB students. And what I want is I simply want one group that needs to be created, so I'm not doing multiple groups in this case, and save. So group 1 is automatically created. I can go into group 1 and rename this if I wanted to give it a different name. But the important thing is that I can start adding students to this list. So there's no students on that list. And if I went in, I can start to enroll users. And this just presents me with my class list. And I could say that this student and this student are IB students and the other ones aren't. So I click Save. Okay, so there's 2 members to this list called IB Students Group 1, and they should be listed right here. So that's pretty useful to me later on if for example I wanted my IB students to have access to a special folder for enrichment that maybe applies to their program requirements but doesn't apply to the rest of the students in the class. So let's say I had a folder here that I called IB Work, and I now go and add in a release condition, and I base that release condition on a group enrollment. So I go down here, I find group enrollment, and I make the choice that they have to be a part of group 1 and update. Okay, so over here, because this student was on that list, you can see that they have access to it. If I went back to my groups and I took this student off of that group, and I'll do that just for comparison. Enroll users. And I took this student off of the list, save it. Okay. Okay, so I just had to go back to the home page. It needed to refresh, and now that it's been refreshed, you'll notice that this student no longer has access to the IB folder because they are no longer on the IB list. Okay, so that's a lot of information, but it is quite powerful, and there's a lot you can do with controlling what students see and when they see it, and I thought that would be useful for you to know about.